What if the most shocking Hollywood endings didn't happen on screen but on the highway behind the fame? The flashing cameras and the million-dollar smiles were 9 devastating crashes that turned legends into headlines overnight. These aren't just accidents, they're violent, sudden, and deeply unsettling tragedies that left fans speechless and families shattered. From royalty to rock stars, from racing icons to red carpet royalty, these are the 9 most disturbing celebrity deaths in car accident stories, where speed, fate, and a single moment changed everything forever. Sam Kinison. Sam Kinison did not walk onto a stage, he stormed it. In the 1980s, his voice was not merely heard, it detonated. A former Pentecostal preacher turned outlaw comic, he carried the rhythm of the pulpit into smoky clubs and HBO specials, screaming punchlines like sermons delivered from the edge of chaos. Audiences were shocked, offended, electrified, and they kept coming back. Behind the leather jackets and wild-eyed intensity was a man who had wrestled with faith addiction and excess, living as loudly off stage as he did beneath the spotlight. But by 1992, those close to him said something had shifted. He had married 26-year-old dancer Malika Sawiri, cut back on drinking and drugs, and signed new film deals. It was supposed to be a new chapter, calmer, steadier, almost hopeful. On April 10, 1992, just weeks after his honeymoon, Sam climbed into his white Pontiac Turbo Trans Am and began the drive from California to Laughlin, Nevada, where he was scheduled to perform. The desert highway stretched ahead, long, empty, deceptively peaceful. Following behind him were friends who would later witness the unthinkable. At the same time, a Chevrolet pickup truck carrying a group of teenagers sped along US Highway 95. The 17-year-old driver, Troy Pearson, had been drinking. Beer cans rattled in the truck as it swerved recklessly across lanes of traffic. Roughly 30 miles from Sam's destination, the pickup crossed into oncoming traffic. There was no time. The collision was head-on metal, folding into metal glass, exploding into air, thick with dust and shock. Both vehicles were crushed. Astonishingly, Sam initially appeared conscious. He climbed from the wreckage with only visible cuts and minor wounds. Friends rushed to him, urging him to lie down, but he seemed dazed, pacing, speaking softly as if in conversation with someone unseen. "I don't want to die," he reportedly said, his voice trembling. Then, after a pause, "But why?" Moments later, as if responding to an answer only he could hear, he whispered, "Okay, okay, okay," and collapsed. The injuries inside his body told a different story than the surface suggested. His head had struck the windshield. He had not been wearing a seatbelt. An autopsy later revealed catastrophic internal trauma, a torn aorta, a dislocated spine, injuries no one could survive. He died shortly after. His wife survived with minor injuries, released from the hospital the next day, though the emotional devastation would linger far longer than physical scars. Pearson was charged with vehicular manslaughter due to gross negligence. He pleaded guilty and received probation, 300 hours of community service, and a 2-year license suspension. Officially, it was a tragic accident caused by reckless driving and alcohol. The desert reclaimed its silence. Sam Kinison was buried in Tulsa, Oklahoma, his gravestone reading, "In another time and place, he would have been called a prophet." And perhaps that is what lingers most, not just the crash, not just the scream that once shook comedy itself, but those final words on the highway spoken into empty desert air and the mystery of who or what answered him back. Anna Heche. Anna Heche was never simply a Hollywood actress. She was a flicker of defiance in an industry that often punishes those who refuse to play by its rules. Rising to fame in the late 80s and 90s through Another World Volcano, Wag the Dog, in 6 Days, 7 Nights, she carried herself with a luminous confidence that felt almost battle-tested. Her public relationship with Ellen DeGeneres at a time when Hollywood was far less tolerant cost her roles and studio support, yet she stood firm, a smile built like armor. Behind that smile, however, were chapters of struggle, resilience, and a woman who had learned to survive heat long before the flames ever found her. On the morning of August 5th, 2022, in Los Angeles' quiet Mar Vista neighborhood, something shifted. Just after 11 a.m., Anne was driving her blue Mini Cooper along Walgrove Avenue when, according to witnesses, the car sped through the residential street at nearly 80 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone. Then came the impact, violent, abrupt, unforgiving. The vehicle slammed into a home and instantly erupted into a towering blaze. The crash did not whisper, it roared. Flames consumed the car and heavily damaged the house, trapping Anne inside as smoke billowed into the California sky. Firefighters arrived swiftly, but the inferno resisted them. Structural damage, extreme heat, and thick smoke turned the rescue into a desperate battle against time. Nearly 30 minutes passed before she was pulled from the wreckage, 30 minutes inside a burning vehicle. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition and later transferred to the Grossman Burn Center in West Hills. Doctors documented severe second-degree burns across 12% of her body, face, neck, shoulders, chest, along with first-degree burns over 40% and a fractured sternum from the collision. Despite skin grafts, intensive treatment, and relentless medical effort, she never regained consciousness. 6 days later, on August 11th, Anne Heche was declared brain-dead, legally dead under California law. Her heart continued to beat temporarily as her family honored her long-expressed wish to donate her organs through the One Legacy Foundation. Tributes poured in across Hollywood, colleagues recalling her talent and the private pain she had endured with public grace. Her son Homer spoke of unbearable emotional swings during those 6 days, hope rising, then collapsing into silence. The coroner ruled her death an accident caused by inhalation and thermal injuries along with blunt force trauma. Toxicology reports noted certain substances in her system, though authorities clarified at least one was administered in the hospital for pain relief and concluded she was not under the influence at the time of the crash. Officially, the story is complete: a speeding car, a devastating fire, a tragic end. For Anne Heche, if you believe she's finally at peace, free from pain and fire, comment amen below and send her light. Lisa Lopes. Some artists chase fame. Lisa Left Eye Lopes seemed to challenge it, daring it to keep up. As the sharp-edged visionary within TLC, she wasn't just part of the harmony, she was the spark that made it dangerous. In the 1990s, TLC dominated airwaves with cultural-defining hits, and Lisa's rapid-fire versus fearless style and unapologetic intensity became inseparable from the group's identity. She wore rebellion like jewelry, turning controversy into currency. Yet beneath the platinum records and bold persona was a woman marked by turbulence, a painful childhood, public struggles, and a fiery relationship with NFL player Andre Rison that once erupted into headlines when anger and heartbreak collided. By 2002, something inside her appeared to be shifting. She traveled to Honduras seeking spiritual clarity, distancing herself from the noise of celebrity. There, surrounded by jungle air and long stretches of silence, she fasted, meditated, and adopted an alkaline diet influenced by Dr. Sebi. She recorded her thoughts, constantly speaking into a handheld camera about destiny, energy, life, and death, reflections that now feel haunting in retrospect. Weeks earlier, tragedy had brushed close. A 10-year-old boy named Byron Fuentes was fatally struck by a vehicle she was riding in. The coincidence that he shared her last name, Lopes, unsettled her deeply. According to those present, Lisa began expressing a belief that a spirit intended for her had mistakenly taken the boy instead. Whether symbolic grief or genuine premonition, the idea lingered in her words. On April 25, 2002, Lisa was driving a rented Mitsubishi Montero near La Ceiba, filming more material for what would later become the documentary The Last Days of Left Eye. 8 people were inside the SUV. Reports indicate she swerved to avoid a truck that had stopped suddenly ahead. The vehicle veered off the road and flipped multiple times. Lisa, not wearing a seatbelt, was ejected. She suffered fatal injuries to her head and chest. Of all the passengers, she was the only one who died. Authorities concluded the crash resulted from excessive speed and loss of control. Alcohol and illegal substances were ruled out. Officially, it was a tragic accident on a rural road. Yet the timing, her recorded reflections about mortality, and the earlier fatal incident involving the young boy created an atmosphere that felt heavier than coincidence. Her mother later filed a lawsuit alleging the vehicle was prone to rollovers, though the broader narrative remained unchanged. TLC carried on honoring her legacy, but the absence was unmistakable. Lisa Lopes left behind music that still pulses with life and footage filled with questions. In the quiet heat of Honduras, far from the arenas that once echoed her voice, her journey ended abruptly. And to this day, some still revisit her final recordings and wonder, was it merely a sudden turn of the wheel, or had Lisa been sensing the curve in the road long before anyone else saw it? Diana, Princess of Wales. There are women who marry into royalty, and then there was Diana who transformed it. She was not merely the Princess of Wales, she became the people's princess, a figure who stepped beyond palace gates and into hospital wards, minefields, and the hearts of millions. After her divorce from Prince Charles, she seemed to be redefining herself, freer, more independent, no longer confined to the rigid choreography of royal life. Her relationship with Dodi Al-Fayed was splashed across tabloids worldwide, painted as romance, rebellion, or renewal depending on who was telling the story. But behind the camera flashes, she was also a mother preparing to return to London to see her sons William and Harry after a summer away. On the night of August 30th, 1997, Diana and Dodi dined privately inside the Ritz Paris, a hotel owned by Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed. Outside, paparazzi swarmed like a relentless tide, waiting for a single photograph worth a fortune. Just after midnight, in an effort to avoid the press, the couple left through a rear exit. Behind the wheel of a black Mercedes-Benz S280 was Henry Paul, the hotel's acting head of security. With them was bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, the only occupant wearing a seatbelt. The plan was simple: slip away unnoticed. But within minutes, the quiet escape turned into a high-speed flight through the Paris streets. As photographers pursued them on motorcycles, the Mercedes accelerated, reportedly reaching extreme speeds before entering the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. At approximately 12:25 a.m., the vehicle lost control and slammed into a concrete pillar. The impact was catastrophic. Metal twisted. Glass shattered. The world, unaware for a few seconds longer, stood on the brink of heartbreak. Henry Paul and Dodi Al-Fayed died at the scene. Diana was still alive, though gravely injured. A passing French doctor, Dr. Frédéric Mailliez, stopped to assist, unaware at first of who she was. Emergency responders worked urgently stabilizing her before transporting her to Pitié-Salpêtrière Hospital. Despite hours of surgery, the internal injuries were overwhelming, including a severe tear to a pulmonary vein. At 4 a.m. on August 31, 1997, Diana was pronounced dead at age 36. The announcement sent shockwaves across the globe. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Flowers formed oceans of grief. Two young princes, just 15 and 12, faced a loss that no title could shield them from. Investigations later concluded the crash was caused by reckless driving, the pursuit by paparazzi, and the intoxication of Henri Paul. Operation Heche, a British inquiry, reaffirmed that it was a tragic accident, and yet questions refused to fade. What if she had worn a seatbelt? What if the car had driven slower? What if they had never left the Ritz that night? In the years since, theories have surfaced and receded, but certainty remains elusive in the hearts of many. Princess Diana's life was lived under constant scrutiny, and even in death, mystery clings to her story like the flash of a camera that never quite turns off. For Diana, Princess of Wales, if you believe her legacy of love and compassion will never fade, comment 1 below. Cliff Burton. Some musicians follow the rhythm. Cliff Burton rewrote it. As the bassist of Metallica during their explosive rise in the mid-1980s, he was more than a background presence. He was the architect of depth beneath the distortion. With Master of Puppets, the band reached new creative heights, and many credited Burton's classical influences and fearless experimentation for pushing their sound beyond the limits of thrash metal. At just 24 years old, he was already being spoken of as a visionary, a quiet force whose talent burned steady beneath the chaos of fame. In September 1986, Metallica was touring Europe, riding the momentum of gold records and sold-out shows. After a performance in Sweden, the band boarded their tour bus heading toward Copenhagen in the early hours of September 27th. Fatigue hung in the air like invisible fog. Before turning in, Burton and guitarist Kirk Hammett played a simple card game to decide who would claim the more comfortable bunk. Burton drew the ace of spades. It was a small, almost trivial victory, one that would later feel haunting in its randomness. Around 7 a.m., disaster struck. The bus suddenly lost control on a rural Swedish road and skidded off the highway. The driver later claimed black ice caused the vehicle to slide before flipping violently. As the bus overturned, Burton was thrown through the window of his bunk. The massive vehicle landed on top of him. In the stunned silence that followed, the rest of the band scrambled outside into the cold morning air, confronted with a scene too brutal to comprehend. Attempts were made to lift the bus, but when a crane was brought in, it reportedly slipped, dropping the vehicle again. Whether Burton died instantly or in those chaotic moments after remains uncertain. Authorities found no evidence of alcohol or drugs, and the driver was ultimately cleared of wrongdoing. Officially, it was a tragic accident attributed to road conditions. Yet members of the band later admitted they searched the pavement for signs of black ice and found none, leaving a question mark that never quite disappeared. Grief fractured them. James Hetfield reportedly walked for miles in shock and anger, while the others struggled to accept that the quiet genius who shaped their sound was suddenly gone. Metallica chose to continue, later hiring Jason Newsted and releasing Injustice for All in 1988, an album many heard as both evolution and elegy. Burton was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009, securing his place in music history. But among fans and bandmates alike, the memory of that Swedish dawn remains suspended in time. A bus overturned a career unfinished, a future rewritten in seconds. Grace Kelly. Before she became royalty, she was already untouchable. Grace Kelly emerged from 1950s Hollywood like a living sculpture, poised, luminous, impossibly composed. She won an Academy Award, worked with Hitchcock, and seemed destined to reign over cinema. Then, in a twist that felt scripted by fate itself, she left Hollywood behind to marry Prince Rainier III and become Princess of Monaco. The world watched the fairy tale unfold, the movie star who traded red carpets for palace balconies, applause for diplomacy. In Monaco, she became elegance embodied, a symbol of refinement and restraint, a woman who appeared to glide rather than walk. But fairy tales, as history often reminds us, carry shadows behind their shine. On September 13, 1982, Grace was driving her Rover 3500 down a narrow, winding mountain road above Monaco. Beside her sat her youngest daughter, Princess Stephanie. The route was familiar: steep curves, dramatic cliffs, Mediterranean air rising from below. Then something went wrong. The car suddenly veered off the roadway, careened down a steep slope, and crashed. There were no skid marks reported that clearly explained a desperate attempt to brake. The vehicle tumbled before coming to rest among trees and rock. Official reports later stated that Grace had suffered a mild stroke while driving, causing her to lose control of the vehicle. She was rushed to the hospital in Monaco with severe head injuries. Princess Stephanie survived with fractures and bruises. The next day, at age 52, Grace Kelly, Princess of Monaco, was pronounced dead after her family made the decision to remove her from life support. The world struggled to process it. A woman who had embodied composure and control had lost both on a curve she had likely driven countless times before. Rumors circulated quietly in the aftermath. Some whispered about the condition of the brakes. Others speculated whether Grace had truly been driving at the moment of impact. There were murmurs about conflicting early reports about unanswered technical details. None of it was ever formally proven. The official conclusion remained a tragic medical emergency, an accident on a mountain road. Her funeral at the Monaco Cathedral drew royalty, celebrities, and world leaders. The woman who once captivated the silver screen was laid to rest as a princess mourned by millions who had never met her but felt they had known her. Decades later, the image lingers: a winding road above the sea, a sudden silence where there should have been continuity. Was it simply a stroke that altered the course of a nation's icon? Or was there something about that final descent that history will never fully untangle? Thank you for staying with us in remembering Grace Kelly. If you're still here, still watching, still honoring her story, leave a 2 in the comments so we know you're with us. Paul Walker. He built a legacy on speed. On screen, Paul Walker wasn't just driving cars, he was redefining what velocity looked like in modern cinema. As Brian O'Connor in the Fast and Furious franchise, he became the calm center of chaos, the blue-eyed racer with loyalty in his bones and gasoline in his veins. Fame followed him, but unlike many stars, he carried it lightly. Friends described him as grounded private, more interested in the ocean and humanitarian work than Hollywood parties. He had the rare image of a man who seemed untouched by the excess around him. On November 30th, 2013, that image shattered in seconds. Walker had attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide in Santa Clarita, California. It was supposed to be a simple afternoon gathering fast cars fundraising friends. After the event, he climbed into the passenger seat of a silver 2005 Porsche Carrera GT driven by his longtime friend Roger Rodas. The car pulled away from the business park and onto Hercules Street. Moments later, it was traveling at high speed. Then came the loss of control. The Porsche spun, struck a concrete light pole and two trees, and erupted into flames so intense that black smoke towered into the afternoon sky. Witnesses rushed forward but were forced back by the fire. The impact had been catastrophic. Both men were pronounced dead at the scene. The official investigation later concluded that excessive speed, estimated between 80 and 93 miles per hour in a 45 miles per hour zone, caused the crash. No alcohol or drugs were found in either man's system. The road conditions were dry. The vehicle showed no evidence of mechanical failure prior to impact. Yet the symbolism was impossible to ignore. A man whose career was built on precision driving died in a real-life high-performance machine known for its unforgiving nature. Lawsuits followed, including claims against Porsche alleging design flaws. The company maintained that the vehicle was safe when properly operated. The courts ultimately sided with Porsche, reinforcing the official narrative driver error and speed. But facts rarely quiet emotion. Fans gathered at the crash site, leaving candles, model cars, handwritten letters. Production on Furious 7 halted as the cast mourned. The film was later completed using stand-ins and digital effects, ending with a tribute that blurred the line between fiction and farewell. The final scene, two cars diverging on an open highway, felt less like cinema and more like a goodbye whispered to millions. Paul Walker was 40 years old. He left behind a daughter, Meadow, and a global audience who felt the loss personally. The investigation closed the case with clear conclusions. Still, there remains a haunting irony in the silence that followed the roar of an engine replaced by stillness. Selena Gomez. Before she became a legend, before the rhinestone bustiers and sold-out arenas, before the name Selena echoed like a promise across Texas and beyond, she was simply a teenage girl chasing a fragile dream along endless highways. Fame did not arrive wrapped in glitter. It came in the form of long road trips, second-hand equipment, modest motel rooms, and a family band determined to make something impossible feel inevitable. The road was her stage before the stage, and at one point it nearly became her final curtain. In the late 1980s, while traveling between performances with Selena y Los Dinos, the family vehicle was involved in a serious accident. It was not the kind of crash that dominates national headlines. It happened before the Grammys, before platinum records, before the world realized how brightly she would shine. But those close to the family later described the moment as terrifying: a sudden loss of control, tires skidding against unforgiving pavement, a vehicle veering off course in a split second that felt suspended in time. Metal jolted. Silence followed. For a fleeting, breathless instant, everything they had worked toward hung in uncertainty. Selena survived, her family survived, the music survived. What makes that near tragedy feel haunting in hindsight is the fragility of timing. She was still becoming herself, a young Mexican-American artist stepping into a male-dominated Tejano industry with a voice that blended innocence and fire. Her father believed with unshakable conviction that she was destined for greatness. Her siblings stood beside her under stage lights that flickered more often than they dazzled. They were building something brick by brick, melody by melody. And on that stretch of highway, it almost disappeared before it had the chance to fully take form. They didn't stop. They kept driving. They kept performing at fairs, quinceañeras, small-town festivals. The accident became a memory folded quietly into the family story, a reminder of how quickly momentum can shatter. As the years passed, Selena's presence grew magnetic. Albums like Entre a mi Mundo and Amor Prohibido transformed her into the Queen of Tejano, her voice weaving cultural pride with pop ambition. She spoke openly about crossing over into the English language market, about expanding beyond borders. The same highways that once threatened her future became the arteries through which her fame traveled. And then, years later, fate would return in a way no one could predict. Not with screeching tires, but with a moment that stunned the world into disbelief. Looking back, that early road accident feels almost symbolic, as if destiny had already tested her resilience once before. A warning, a rehearsal, or simply coincidence? History remembers her for the brilliance that followed. But somewhere in the archives of family memory lies that earlier curve in the road, the one that nearly rewrote everything before the world even had the chance to fall in love with her. Ayrton Senna. There are champions, and then there are men who seem to race against something unseen. Ayrton Senna was not merely a Formula One driver, he was intensity in human form. To Brazil, he was a symbol of national pride during uncertain times, a figure who carried the flag not just on his helmet but in his heartbeat. Three-time world champion, a master in the rain, a perfectionist who believed that racing was not only mechanical precision but spiritual alignment. When he spoke about God, about destiny, about the fine line between bravery and recklessness, it did not sound rehearsed. It sounded like confession. By 1994, Senna had left McLaren and joined Williams, the dominant team of the era. On paper, it was a powerful alliance. In reality, the season opened under tension. New regulations had banned electronic driver aids like traction control and active suspension systems that once stabilized the cars at extreme speeds. The new Williams FW16 was notoriously difficult to handle. Senna struggled in the opening races, retiring twice. For a driver of his caliber, it was more than frustration, it was a warning. Then came the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola. A weekend that felt cursed before the lights even went out. On Friday, Rubens Barrichello crashed violently during practice. On Saturday, Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger was killed in a qualifying accident. The paddock fell into shock. Senna reportedly visited the crash site. He was visibly shaken. Some said he considered not racing. Others said he felt a responsibility to continue for the sport, for the fans, for something larger than himself. May 1st, 1994. Lap 7. Approaching the high-speed Tamburello corner, a section of track with minimal runoff and a concrete wall waiting beyond it, Senna's car suddenly failed to turn. At more than 200 kilometers per hour, the Williams shot straight ahead and slammed into the barrier. The impact was devastating. A suspension arm pierced his helmet. The race was stopped. Silence spread through living rooms across the world as cameras lingered on the motionless cockpit. He was airlifted to Bologna's Maggiore Hospital. Hours later, doctors announced that Ayrton Senna had died from catastrophic head injuries. He was 34 years old. The investigation that followed stretched over years. Data suggested that a modified steering column altered to improve cockpit comfort may have fractured, causing loss of control. Italian prosecutors charged key Williams engineers, including team principal Frank Williams and chief designer Adrian Newey. After lengthy court proceedings, all were ultimately cleared, the final ruling racing accident likely triggered by mechanical failure. But that legal conclusion did not quiet the deeper unease. Why was Tamburello still bordered by concrete at such speeds? Why had safety improvements lagged behind engineering ambition? Why did it take a weekend of 2 fatalities for the sport to change? Senna's death became a turning point. Formula One was forced into transformation, circuits were redesigned, runoff areas expanded, car structures reinforced, medical response protocols tightened. For more than 2 decades afterward, no driver would die during a Formula One race weekend, a silent testament to the cost of that day. In Brazil, millions lined the streets of Sao Paulo for his funeral. The procession resembled a state farewell. Grown men wept openly. Flags waved. The nation mourned not only a champion, but a man who had made them believe that discipline and faith could conquer any curve, could conquer any curve, could conquer any curve. Selena Gomez. Before she became a legend, before the rhinestone bustiers and sold-out arenas, before the name Selena echoed like a promise across Texas and beyond, she was simply a teenage girl chasing a fragile dream along endless highways. Fame did not arrive wrapped in glitter. It came in the form of long road trips, second-hand equipment, modest motel rooms, and a family band determined to make something impossible feel inevitable. The road was her stage before the stage, and at one point it nearly became her final curtain. In the late 1980s, while traveling between performances with Selena y Los Dinos, the family vehicle was involved in a serious accident. It was not the kind of crash that dominates national headlines. It happened before the Grammys, before platinum records, before the world realized how brightly she would shine. but those close to the family later described the moment as terrifying, a sudden loss of control, tires skidding against unforgiving pavement, a vehicle veering off course in a split second that felt suspended in time. Metal jolted. Silence followed. For a fleeting, breathless instant, everything they had worked toward hung in uncertainty. Selena survived, her family survived, the music survived. What makes that near tragedy feel haunting in hindsight is the fragility of timing. She was still becoming herself, a young Mexican-American artist stepping into a male-dominated Tejano industry with a voice that blended innocence and fire. Her father believed with unshakable conviction that she was destined for greatness. Her siblings stood beside her under stage lights that flickered more often than they dazzled. They were building something brick by brick, melody by melody. And on that stretch of highway, it almost disappeared before it had the chance to fully take form. They didn't stop. They kept driving. They kept performing at fairs, quinceañeras, small-town festivals. The accident became a memory folded quietly into the family's story, a reminder of how quickly momentum can shatter. As the years passed, Selena's presence grew magnetic. Albums like Entre a mi mundo and Amor Prohibido transformed her into the queen of Tejano, her voice weaving cultural pride with pop ambition. She spoke openly about crossing over into the English language market, about expanding beyond borders. The same highways that once threatened her future became the arteries through which her fame traveled. And then years later, fate would return in a way no one could predict. Not with screeching tires, but with a moment that stunned the world into disbelief. Looking back, that early road accident feels almost symbolic, as if destiny had already tested her resilience once before. A warning, a rehearsal, or simply coincidence? History remembers her for the brilliance that followed. But somewhere in the archives of family memory lies that earlier curve in the road, the one that nearly rewrote everything before the world even had the chance to fall in love with her.